Hi class. So today we are working on, going to be talking about chapter 12, stress and success in family life. We're already on chapter 12. We are a huge majority through this semester. We are kind of winding down here. Well, I don't know if we're winding down or we're winding up, but we are in the home stretch. So I hope you're looking forward to that and feeling that. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about stress and then move into some family background and what that means in terms of student success in school. We're going to kind of focus on that aspect of it today. So let me get going here. Okay. So the first type of stress that I want to talk about is called developmental stress. And this is really an unavoidable part of life. This is something that's necessary. If everything was just smooth and easy and never stressed us at all, or children when they're growing up, they would not get to experience what it's like to persevere or to try something hard and see it through. They wouldn't necessarily, they would learn less ultimately. If we think back to the topic of scaffolding, where a child can learn what they can learn at their level, but they need that other person, whether it's another peer that might know more on that topic, or whether it's an adult coming in and giving them clues to help them get to that next level. You know, not understanding a concept for a little while is a stress that's important because it makes you think more critically. It helps you to develop those skills that you need to, keep trying, move forward, think about different creative solutions to a problem, all of that. So stress comes in natural forms during young childhood and even into adulthood in life. We know that as adults. But in the form of homework, right? Struggling with homework or a new concept that you're learning in school, that's a normal part of developmental stress. Now, if it's all the time, that's a different story. But when it's a new concept that's just been presented to a child, it makes sense that they would have some stress kind of trying to figure that out until it clicks, and then they can move on. Going to the doctor. This is stressful for many, many, many children, many, many adults that kind of help share those fears with their children. But it's an important stress, right? It's a stress that if we can get through it, if you can cope through it, you will be healthier for it because you'll be fully immunized, or you will have caught that health condition early and it's treatable. There's reasons to feel stressed because typically a medical experience might involve learning something about yourself that's uncomfortable, whether it's, a diagnosis or the doctor's telling you how you need to, change things about your life to be more healthy. Or it can involve pain sometimes, right? Like immunizations or needing to have some kind of, medication administered through an IV, whatever it might be, a surgery. But those small doses of stress, if you can work through them, can actually build confidence. So helping support children through these, which is what I do at the hospital every week, is really important because it gives them the tools to cope with this and keep it a developmental stress versus it moving into what is a toxic stress, where that's when children develop things like phobias and start to have avoidance behaviors to some of these types of necessities, right? Our health should be a priority and it should be something that we are preventive about. But if you have a phobia, if it's become more of a toxic stress in your life, then you are always trying to avoid it. You are ignoring signs and symptoms that your body gives you. That's not healthy, right? But coping through something small like immunizations, that is a developmental stress that is unavoidable, but it's a good thing for children to learn how to do. Relationships. These are a developmental stress. We're all human. We all have different emotions, different moods at times. And there are many times when just being in the same household with another person is stressful. Some more than others. But the fact is that learning how to cope with other people, learning the art of apologizing when you need to, forgiving others when you need to, all of that is really healthy for children to learn. We need others in our life, even though it causes momentary types of stress. If it causes toxic stress, then that's a different story. And that might mean that that person should not be in your life. But normal relationship issues are part of developmental stress. I think about my own children and their bickering, and things that seem very unimportant to me are just massively important to them, and they will go at it. And then, 5 minutes later, it's just like, hey, do you want to play this game? And then they're fine again. They learn how to work through that. And that's important. Learning new skills. So, right, a child that's trying a new puzzle for the first time. We kind of talked about this a little bit with homework, but again, when you're first learning some kind of skill, it can be very frustrating. We've all seen the toddler or the preschooler that just takes the game or takes the puzzle and just chucks it across the room because they're so frustrated they can't figure out where that next piece goes. That's a developmental stress. Hopefully they have a caring adult with them that will bring that back and help guide them. Hey, let me help you with this. And I bet if we work together, we can get it. And then that teaches them how to not only do the puzzle, but cope with a stressful situation, right? They're learning, oh, I don't have to throw the puzzle across the room and destroy what I've already created. I could have just asked for help, right? That's a good stress, because then they learn a way to cope with it. Dentist, kind of same idea as the doctor's office or medical care. It's important to go through some of these stressors, but learn how to cope with them effectively so that we can manage those parts of our life that need managing. So again, these are opportunities for acquiring coping techniques or learning new skills. That's what developmental stress does for us. And it's an important part of life. Toxic stress, however, is very different. So these are significant life stressors. They cause anxiety. They shape a child's development negatively. For children that go through some of these life stressors, and we're going to talk about a few here, but it's not an exhaustive list for sure. Children need like professional emotional support and coping guidance through this: therapy, counseling, psychological support. So this includes things like divorce. It might include or being separated from a parent. So that could be even something like a deportation or incarceration. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But anything that separates a child from one of their parents, a death even, that's really important to work through with children. A medical condition that is lifelong and chronic, or potentially the child is concerned for their own life. So, even childhood cancer, even if it's cured, can be a toxic stress because it was so impactful during the time that they did have the cancer and were going through the treatments, and they were concerned that they didn't know if they would live or die. That is definitely a toxic stress. And it is on the whole family. It's not just the child. Bullying or other social situations where a child's ostracized. Some of these happen in major moments and situations, sometimes in very physical ways, like an actual physical assault, or sometimes it could be small moments where they're just made fun of over and over and over again repeatedly, to the point where it really shapes how they feel about going to school, how they feel about themselves. So it doesn't always have to be, toxic stress doesn't have to be one big event like a diagnosis of an illness or a parent's divorce. It can be moment after moment after moment of repeated exposure to this stress. Same with this last picture, the idea of labeling a child. So a child that sort of has acquired a label from and it's sad to say, but the people that love that child are supposed to be looking out for their best interests, like their teachers or their parents. If they're constantly called bad or unteachable or distracted or naughty or lazy, those are words that, again, the buildup over time creates this new concept that this child has that is a toxic stress. Any child going through a toxic stress has an increased risk of not only serious physical conditions or illnesses, but also mental health disorders. And so these need professional help and support for the whole family. Other kinds of toxic stress, chronic poverty a child is living in, violence or war, so living in areas where that is witnessed on a regular basis, and that constant fear of an attack that could be looming, abuse and neglect, of course. Maternal depression, we don't always think about this. We think about it being something that affects the mother, or maybe even a marriage, but it actually, because that typically affects the way that that baby can attach to their parent, right? Attachment is forming in that first year of life most. And if the mother is going through depression right after birth, it can create an unhealthy attachment. And that sets that child up for, the foundation of all their other social relationships from there on out. And so without professional intervention, and the mother can continue to stay depressed, or that child, continues to have that attachment base that is unhealthy. Also, food insecurity. So not having enough food to eat in the house. So, actually going hungry is probably more of the toxic stress here in this situation, although food insecurity can also mean just not having enough nutrients in your food, even if there's a lot of food. So that means you're having a lot of junk food and empty calories. So food is in abundance, but it's all bad for you. I think this toxic stress would probably, even though that other kind of food insecurity is very unhealthy, this toxic stress would be more the kind that you don't know where your next meal is coming from. So how do we find resilience in children? There are three, because we don't want to just leave it, right, with, okay, go through these hard things and it's just look forward to, doom and gloom. We do know that there are children that even when they go through toxic stress events, find resilience. Now, many of these may find that through professional help, and I hope that they get that. And I hope, even if you're an adult and you realize you experience toxic stress, that you will seek out professional help. Even now, it's not too late. But resilience in children typically has three different components. One is personal characteristics of the child. There are certain characteristics that we have, or that research has identified, that lend themselves to a more resilient child. The other component is a strong attachment with a dependable adult. Now, a lot of times this can be an attachment figure like a parent or the mother, but it can also be other really important people that become very dependable and consistent in that child's life. And they help to kind of replace they help buffer the stress, I guess is a way to put it. It's almost like having a cushion between the stress, assault, and the child, and that's that dependable adult. And then also having social support networks outside of the family. So again, I think we've talked about this before, especially, if we go back to chapter 1 with the bioecological model and the idea of the microsystem, right? No one just lives in their microsystem, even though it can be the most influential force in a child's life. It's those other layers that are part of the community, part of other social networks outside of the family that can also have a really important impact on children. And that's where we see some of this resilience come from. So when it comes to personal characteristics of a child that is more resilient, we see children with above average intelligence. They might have positive self-esteem, and they might have effective problem-solving skills. So these are things that kind of innately this child is just born with. Because a lot of times if a child is experiencing toxic stress, even though we know that toxic stress can run the gamut of socioeconomic status, race, different cultures and ethnicities, toxic stress doesn't discriminate, but many times it is a part of families' lives that are experiencing lower socioeconomic status. And so we also know from research, those families typically don't have children that excel in school, but excelling in school isn't necessarily the same as above average intelligence. This could be a child that has that witty sense of humor that helps to diffuse like an angry parent, or that makes connections with other people so that they have those outlets and those buffers and those other people in their life that can help buffer that toxic stress. So the above average intelligence isn't just about book smarts or academics. Okay. The strong attachment. So having that secure attachment, right? That meant that there was an adult that sensitively responded to that child, that nourished them physically and emotionally, that is available to them and responds when necessary. This is what we talked about when we talked about attachment. This typically does come and kind of set the stage during early infancy for that child's life. And so having that is a really strong or a really helpful component for having a resilient child. And then the support network. This can look like, kind of anything from that mesosystem or exosystem, right? Church groups, other organized types of sports. They're always part of the same group of soccer team and soccer players that have been playing together for years. And so that child, has an extended family in a sense with that group. It could be a boys and girls club. It could be like a big brother, big sister situation in those community groups. Any other group where you're finding that those people in that group build you up, make you feel good, are sometimes a responsive adult. It might be an adult from one of those support networks that is always available to you if you need to talk to them, that makes you feel good about yourself, which is what gives you your positive self-esteem. So a lot of times these three things are coming together for a child. They're not just receiving one of these components, they're receiving all of these components. And that helps build their resilience. Okay, so we talked a little bit about stress. We are now going to move into certain family backgrounds and school success. Some of this is coming from, or most of this information is coming from an article called How Family Background Influences Student Achievement, and the link is there if you would like to look at the full article. But when we're talking about school success, we're talking more academically. I realize success is a loaded word. It is very subjective. We hear the term success, and I think we instantly kind of think of like somebody rolling around in gold coins or, living in a mansion. Success can be wildly different. And so even within school, some children academically it comes very easy to them, but maybe socially, that's what's hard for them. And vice versa, right? The social component is easy, but the academics is hard. This term school success, I think, is, and like it says, student achievement in the title of the article. This is more about, I think, achieving or performing well in school academically. But again, there is a wide variety of what success means to different people, depends on your family values and things like that. So the idea of a family being successful, like our chapter's been talking about, that can have a vast array of contexts, right? Like I think of, a family that's driving around in a really nice car, that might feel very successful to them. Other families might be driving around in an old beat up car, but they don't have a car payment. So that feels successful to them because they're not in debt. So it just really depends on the family. And so that's important to think about when you're reading the context of this book and your textbook. I'm pointing over here because that's where the textbook is next to me. But again, we're going to talk about right now with this article, 4 different types of family backgrounds and how they can affect student success at school. So the first one is parent education. This feels like it makes a pretty simple connection in our minds, because if your parent has less of an education, it might mean then that the children in multiple ways could be similar, right? If the parent didn't value education, then they might not make that a priority to their children. If the parent values education but has a low education level, they can't help their children with homework, and so that makes it harder. This is probably, the parent's education level is a lot of times one of the strongest correlations to student achievement. So when a parent has a higher education, a lot of times there's also other factors that they're thinking about. It's not just, if a parent went to college, they expect their child to go to college. There's many other factors that come into play, and it's even, even socially. So the idea that if a parent has a higher education level, they're actually thinking too more about what school their child's going to go to. I mean, and this can start even in like preschool, right? I'm gonna live in this area because it's nicer. It looks like it has nicer schools, or the setting is more affluent. I want my child to go to this private school, or I want to go to the highest rated school in town. And so a parent's education level helps them determine where they even want their child to go to school. Now you can also think back to the fact that a parent's education level also probably is an indicator of their social economic status. The higher an education, typically the more money you make. If you were able to get a higher education, then that means generationally speaking, maybe those parents had more money to pay for that education. Not always, right? Sometimes that's not true, but typically there's a higher socioeconomic status when it comes to education level as well. And so the school setting becomes important, or where the family lives, so that they are close to what they perceive as a better school. They are also going to pay more attention to teacher quality. So they think through how the child is taught by the teacher. They are thinking through that teacher's ability to connect with their child, and that really makes a difference too. Some families might think of the teacher as kind of like on a pedestal, like they're the boss. Whatever they say is what you do. And it doesn't matter sometimes how the teacher says it. It's just kind of the expectation is you're gonna comply as a child, and as the parent, I'm on the teacher's side. But the higher the parent's education level, the more sometimes parents are willing to say, like, I don't like how you're talking to my child, or I don't think the way that this is being taught is connecting with him. And there's more of those conversations happening, which ultimately can be beneficial. If it's advocating for the child, it can be beneficial for the child as well. And then typically the higher education level, the increase in reading that happens at home. And the reading is one of the main factors for children's academic success. If you can encourage a child to read and you get them reading well, it makes everything that they do easier. Even when it comes to math and science and other subjects, if you can read well, then you can understand directions on how to solve a math problem, or you can understand this concept in science or this information about history. So it just opens everything up a little bit wider to make it a little bit easier for children. And so we see that with parent education, that the higher their education level, the more that they are encouraging their children to read, they're reading to them earlier. And that has a huge component in children's academic success. At one point, our school actually only did reading as homework. There was no other homework at school for all grade levels, because they just wanted to push getting children to read. They wanted to make that statement that, like, this is how important it is. It's not like that anymore, but it was at one point, and I was kind of okay with it. Family income. This makes a lot of sense too, right? So family income is going to have a direct impact on quality of school, just like we talked about with the education level. And parents with a higher education are thinking more about where they're located and where they're going to live in reference to what schools are available to their children. The higher income you have, the more options you have for those kinds of choices. And so a lot of times, children or families will choose a school where children are going to have a higher quality of school if they have more money to make that happen. Families from higher incomes are also going to have more exposure to extracurricular activities. So this might be going to the zoo. This might be trips to different museums. This could be, special field trips, family vacations, even just participation in sports and other activities weekly that child is involved in. They're going to be able to provide that more because all of those things cost money. And they're going to probably have more available time as a parent, right? They're not stressed about just meeting the basic needs. That moves them up in terms of that hierarchy pyramid. We're going to look at that at the end here as our last slide. But when a parent doesn't have to just worry about providing the physical needs for children or a safe environment for their children, then they're more not only emotionally available, but just physically available. They're not working as much because they get paid more per hour probably. So you don't have to work as many hours in a day to make the same or more. And so parents have more time to be involved, right? All of this just makes some pretty easy sense. Another background that we look at that affects student success in school is also parent incarceration. Obviously, this would be a toxic stress to a family, especially if it's a prolonged separation that child has from that parent, or it could potentially lead to a permanent separation or a divorce or parents splitting up and things like that. So, but what is most often true, which I thought was an interesting fact, is that the parent that is incarcerated is typically the one that brings in the most income before the incarceration happens. So it's kind of a multiple whammy, double whammy. The parent that's incarcerated then cannot bring in that income anymore. And so the family now is even not only separated from their loved one, but they are with a much lower household income, which changes the whole stress dynamic or adds even another layer of stress to this situation. Many families of an incarcerated parent end up experiencing homelessness because, again, they don't have that income source. And so they can't pay their bills and they are evicted, and then they're living in their car or on the street for a while. Obviously, it adds an emotional strain to the family. And again, all of this depends on the length of incarceration and what kind of the final outcome in terms of the family's, the family bond and the availability of that parent to be in the child's life. But most of the time, an incarceration is not going to bring a family closer. And now you've got a single parent household that doesn't have enough income to, care for their children, provide the basic needs. So you've got now a single parent situation that already has stress involved, because it's hard enough to care for children when there's two parents, let alone now you've got one who's under this emotional strain. They don't have the availability, not only in terms of time, but emotionally, they just don't have the availability to be there for their children and to help support school, because they're just trying to maybe keep a roof over their head or constantly look for a job to bring in income now that this other parent is out of the picture for a while. So it's an incredibly stressful time. And the family structure. This is something we'll talk about even more in the next chapter, but the family structure makes a difference too. So a two-parent household, and we're coming back to reading here again, because again, reading is so important, but there has been data that suggests that a two-parent household will read to their children 8.5 times per week versus a single-parent household where it only happens 5.7. Now, you might be thinking, okay, like 3, a difference of 3, is that really, that much? And it doesn't seem like it, just when we think about 1 week, right? But if we think about, and I did a little calculations before I started this, if we think of 52 weeks in a year and we think of those first 5 years of life, so let's just say 52 weeks times 5 years, and then we multiply that many weeks times 3, the 3 times less that they're being read to, in those 5 years, that's 780 times less that child is read to. And so that does make a big difference. That's a lot of times. We're talking about, and a lot of things when it comes to stress, we're talking about a cumulative, the effect of something happening over and over. So even though 3 times a week less doesn't seem like a big deal when it comes to reading a few books, the accumulation of all those 3 times really makes a big impact. And so that's important to think about. And it's not always that we're not saying that one family structure is better or worse. We're just pointing out the data, right? That says, well, here's probably going to be a difference. And it makes sense. In a single parent household, you're going to have less time. I mean, you're just going to. There's not another person that can read to the kids while you're cleaning up the dinner dishes, or you might have to work 2 jobs and you're gone from your children multiple times or multiple hours of that day. And so it's just a matter of logistics, really, that make it so that children are receiving less reading. And that's okay. But it's important to know that if you're in one of those situations where, hey, this could be an issue, my children may get read less to because I'm a single parent, well, then now you know, right? So now you have the information and you can do something about that. It's not just, this isn't information to say that one is bad or good, or it's a judgment on anybody. It's to say, well, if I'm in a single parent situation, then maybe I'm going to really impress upon whoever's caring for my kids after school, like, please read to them, so that they're getting that extra reading support from somebody. It doesn't have to be the parent that reads to them, right? I mean, of course, it's a great thing to do, and it can be a nice time to spend with your children, but you can impress upon other people that are helping you in your life to care for your children, I'd really love for you to read them, especially if you're paying them to care for your children. Then you can kind of tell them what to do, right? You can say, please make sure you read 5 books to my child during these 3 hours you're caring for them after school, right? That's okay to say. And that can be a way that, because you have this information, you can help buffer your child in terms of their school success. The other family structure was households that have absent fathers have a higher increase in children, specifically the sons, with antisocial behavior and lower educational attainment. So again, this is just information. If your household does not have a father currently, or you are working with children whose father is absent, it's not to place a label on that child. It's not to place a judgment on that family. It's to know the facts that we're seeing this in terms of data. We're seeing some of these outcomes. What can we do now while children are young to help prevent that outcome, right? We can't necessarily just go grab any father off the street and make them now their father. We can't do that, but we can go back to what makes children resilient and look at that child's life and say, do we have these things? Do they have like an dependable adult that is able to care for them, that is there for their social and emotional needs, not just the physical needs? Are they involved in outside community groups that feel really fun and supportive to that child? Are they, what are some strengths that my own child has that I can tap into and really encourage? So there are things that we can do, knowing this information, to help try to change the trajectory so that children don't become another statistic. Okay, so the last slide, like I said, was going to be about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And again, just thinking about some of those family backgrounds, when they're trying to just deal with the physical needs of the child, or keeping a roof over their head, or feeding them, that's a full-time job. If that is economically where a family is at, that's the full-time job. They can't think about the other things. They can't think about, how many times have I read to my child today, right? It doesn't even register. They're thinking, good thing they have a teacher. That's their job. My job is just to keep us in this house, right? If they're in an unsafe environment, then that becomes the main focus. These things have to be taken care of before some of these other components before school success can really become a focus for a family. And so that's why I kind of stuck reading right here. Like, if the family doesn't have these basics met, right? If their background lends to the fact that this is what this family is probably having to deal with, like, right? So if you know that a child in your class has a parent that's incarcerated, sending home information about reading to their child every night is not going to make a difference, right? They're going to need something else. They're going to need, you to connect with them. And next chapter, we're going to talk a little bit more about family engagement and connection, and even small ways we can do that with families. But you've really got to help promote families to this level of this pyramid before you can think about reading or school success or even thinking that the parent's concern is going to be student achievement. They're going to leave that job to you as the teacher, because they don't have any other extra bandwidth to worry about it if they don't even feel safe, or if they don't even have their physiological needs met. Okay, so that may have been a little bit off of topic of the chapter, but I felt like instead of just regurgitating the chapter text, it's interesting to look at things differently and kind of relate it back to some of our other lectures and some of these core theories that we've been talking about throughout this class. If you have any questions, you are more than welcome to contact me. I am always open to that, and I look forward to connecting with you guys soon. Bye-bye.